It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We have a returning guest, John Potash, from the wonderful film. It's just hit the bookstores and it's on Amazon now. Drugs as Weapons Against Us. You can find his website, johnpotash.com. On there, too, there's a link to his other fascinating book. We've had him on the show, The FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders. But today, like I said, we're going to be talking once again about drugs as weapons against us. John, are you there?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Ed.
Hey, it's always great to have you on, man.
Thanks a lot.
I know you're a busy guy, too, man. You're out there running around like crazy. Yeah. So tell us, remind the audience, who is John Potash?
Well, I work as a counselor for a living, and on the side, I do a lot of writing. And, I've written 2 books now, The FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders, and Drugs as Weapons Against Us, with the long subtitle, The CIA's Murderous Targeting of SDS, Panthers, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, and Other Activists. And so I turned the first book into a very rudimentary movie film. And the second book I've turned into a much more elaborate film with the different subtitle, The CIA War on Musicians and Activists. And counseling is what, is my day job and what pays my bills. Yeah, I'm just trying to do some activism on the side. I just happen to get a nice distributor, I'll say, who's got me in a lot of places in terms of, getting me in. Now you can see my film. You can rent it on places like iTunes, you can rent it on Vudu, Vimeo, Google Play, YouTube Rent. You can also buy it at Barnes & Noble, as you mentioned. You can buy it at Best Buy. You can buy it through Walmart and through Target. Now, I know Walmart and Target, they just ship it. I know Barnes & Noble has it in some stores. And we'll see about whether Best Buy is going to have it in their stores or they're just shipping it.
Okay, and you can also get it direct at johnpotash.com. John will mail it to you himself, which is better than going through Walmart, Walmart.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Supporting the artists more than supporting Walmart, right?
Yeah. Anyway, they got enough of our money, man. Walmart.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, so you come to this, your counseling is drug counseling, right?
Well, my counseling is all kinds of counseling. My expertise these days with training in the last few years is in trauma work. And so people have been through all kinds of different trauma, whether it be sexual abuse, physical abuse, war trauma, et cetera. But I also have an expertise in addictions counseling. So I've got a strong percentage of people I counsel with addictions, a strong percentage with trauma, and then a strong percentage with just disorders in general.
And don't you find that many people with addictions, it's based because they've had some early childhood trauma?
Yeah, with women more so. The statistics say that about 70% of female addicts had some abuse in their life of some form, physical or sexual. But men, it's not as much so. Men, there can be more. It just tends to be more general addiction in men for some reason. Though, sure, a percentage of men, I'm not sure the exact percentage, could be 20, 30% might have had some kind of abuse in their life, but it's different for men.
And have you ever seen anything like we're experiencing now with the heroin addiction and people on these opiates and stuff?
I don't see. Look, heroin addiction has been around for decades now. The Vietnam War really sent heroin addiction soaring when they were, getting the CIA was sending all that heroin from the Vietnam area, the Golden Triangle for poppy fields into the United States. And I have John Stockwell, CIA agent whistleblower, talking about that. I also have Judy Woodruff of Frontline saying, here's the CIA document admitting their heroin trafficking from Vietnam to the United States. And but today, yes, the Afghanistan area is supplying a vast amount of heroin. So it might be even higher than it was during the Vietnam War era. And there's, you've probably heard in the news of these pharmaceutical companies pushing painkillers like crazy that are getting so many people addicted to, opiates in general. And then when they feel like when they're building up more of a tolerance and the painkillers aren't enough, they've turned to heroin, sadly enough.
Yeah, and what I've noticed too, because coming from, I lived in New York City back in the 70s and the 80s. I lived back in New York City, and you used to have to like drive to Harlem, or drive to Alphabet City to get your heroin. But now it's like a whole community of heroin addicts and opiate addicts who hand to hand supply each other with small amounts, it's a whole. So what happens is once you get addicted in that culture, all your friends, the people you associate with, they're all part of that same addiction.
It does seem to be the case, right?
It's a nightmare. And I can't see how people can extract themselves with that kind of thing once they get so deep into it. I don't see how they can extract themselves.
Well, it takes having the parents practice tough love and stop it. You have to get all the enablers out of the picture. And you have to make the addict see a serious bottom, meaning either homelessness, loss of work and homelessness, and being jailed as a consequence of their addiction, or else they're not going to turn it around. They're not going to change, sadly enough.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, but very often too, I find that the parents are addicts too. The parents are my age. They got 20-year-old kids, and the parents have been an addict for 20 years. And now their kid's an addict. It's just
addiction is very genetic, so that can often be the case too. It's true.
It's a nightmare. So now the film has just become available, like I said, on Amazon. It's just become available to the public, right?
Just in the past week and a half, sure.
So now, what's the kind of reaction you're getting?
Yeah, I mean, people are telling me great, really nice things about it. They're saying all kinds of very nice things about it. So I'm very happy. I mean, when I was taking it through film festivals, I won about 13 awards at different festivals and was selected for about 35 different festivals. So I'm very happy about that already. And I actually did things a little backwards and got a distributor before I started going through the film festivals. Don't ask me why. I just didn't know how it all worked. And I was just so happy to get anyone offering me distribution because so many people didn't, just wouldn't even talk to me about my film because it's so controversial. So to get, a major distributor saying they distributed it, I was just so happy. Now, sadly enough, I thought they were going to try to put it in theaters, and they weren't, and they didn't tell me that when I signed the contract. So that's too bad. But I'm just glad to get the word out any which way.
Yeah, we watched it on the big screen at the Love Film Festival in Beverly Hills back. I guess it was around August. We went out there and saw because I'm in the film. The audience should know that this is the film that I'm in. Me and Hank Harrison have a little clip in this movie, and it was very well received by the audience. Everybody loved it that was there. I enjoyed it too very much. Very, very excellent film. Very educational. A lot of great content in here.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Now, what about the portion though, the Kurt Cobain portion though? How are people receiving that? Because it's such a controversial topic, and people, especially true crime fans, they think they got everything figured out, and everybody has their own theory. How is your presentation being received?
Well, nobody has, told me what they think about it yet, to be honest. I just haven't heard. They just told me about the film in general, a few people. I just haven't heard enough feedback, except, I had one guy review the film that, gave it a real positive review and was very fascinated by the Kurt Cobain stuff. Another reviewer highlighted when she gave a good review, she highlighted the Kurt Cobain stuff. But no one's really given me like direct feedback on a lot of specifics about the Kurt Cobain section of the film.
Well, why don't you lay out your theory of the Cobain situation?
So, there's my theory in the book is fully hashed out because I have a lot of pages to do that with. But people have to understand my book's about 430 pages. Well, inside, with those pages, a lot of them is endnotes and pictures, but nonetheless, it's somewhere between 300 to 400 pages of just regular content. And the film is a 60-page script to be a 2-hour film. So it's got to be much less in there. So I couldn't give every detail of my theory in the film that I have in the book. So the film I'll just talk about more right now it shows all the evidence that basically it starts with John Stockwell talking about how in the late 80s, I have footage of him from being interviewed in the late 80s saying that his fellow CIA agents talking about them trafficking the heroin from the Golden Crescent area, the second, the other best area for growing poppies and producing opium and heroin. It was around the Afghanistan region. It's the other end of the same mountain range as the Golden Triangle and the Vietnam area. Okay, so here's all tons of heroin starting to come in from that Golden Crescent area to the United States. And I show the evidence that they had to, they were worried about demand matching supply. So they psychologically profiled different musicians the same way they'd done in the 60s when they manipulated a lot of musicians to use different drugs, like dosing John Lennon with acid and undercover agent convincing Mick Jagger to use his first hit of acid in 1967 with Lennon was 65. And all that was happening then. But so here we are now in the early 90s, like around 1990, and they got all this heroin coming in, but the demand's not matching supply. So I show the evidence that they psychologically profiled Kurt Cobain because he had a massive stomach problem that was leaving him incredible pain. And in his own diaries, he said he had tried heroin to handle that pain. After trying all the medications and nothing working, he tried heroin about 3 or 4 times in about 4 years or so. I said, man, I think it was maybe 6 times total in 4 years. But once his album Nevermind, for Nirvana's Nevermind started rising in the charts, like really, in a meteoric way going up the charts, all of a sudden in his life comes Courtney Love. She happened to be dating Billy Corgan, and she's at a party with Kurt Cobain. She just leaves Billy Corgan high and dry and puts all her attention on Kurt Cobain. They end up dating, and she gets pregnant very fast. And he marries her because of her pregnancy. He marries her with a prenuptial agreement. And now everybody, I show quotes of people from the scene, all the friends of those two, saying that she appeared to, she got Cobain using heroin daily for the first time in his life, and she was very manipulative with that. But then I show the evidence that he was divorcing her within the last months of their marriage. And he actually had already gotten completely sober. He found a medication which cured his stomach problem. And I have him, talking about that in an interview in the film. And then I show the evidence that he did a blood test in Rome because he had gone into a coma when he was really didn't want to see Courtney Love, but he wanted to see his daughter. And so she took Francis Bean Cobain over to see him when he was in Rome, touring in Rome. She had been in England playing music in England, but she got a sleep medication in England where it's legal to prescribe Rohypnol for sleep, and Rohypnol is roofies. And so she gets over there, and all of a sudden he's passed out in a coma. She waits a while to call an ambulance. She calls an ambulance, and she's puts on full makeup by the time they come there. And when they tested him at the Rome hospital, his blood had no illegal substances in it except for Rohypnol. So he wasn't a heroin addict at that time. A month before he died, he had no heroin in his system. That means he couldn't have been a heroin addict, at that time. And he wasn't even smoking weed. He wasn't doing any illicit substances at that time. And so a month later, they say, he died of, he killed himself. But best evidence is, and so I show Cyril Wecht, the former head of the American Academy of Forensic Science, saying that when a Pittsburgh news station saying that he believes that Kurt Cobain was murdered and was made to look like a suicide based on all the evidence that he saw. And so he also says one for Soaked in Bleach, and he said, I have that in my film, that he's in, his entire career, he's about 81, 82 years old. In his entire career, he's never seen anybody shoot up a massive amount of heroin, really enough to kill 6 people, he says, in an earlier interview that happened in the film, and then proceed to shoot himself. That he says it just doesn't make sense. And so that's some of the evidence that he was murdered and didn't commit suicide. But of course, I also have the interview of Eldon Hoke who said that Courtney Love offered him $50,000 to blow her old man's head off. And he says in the film, he says, I end up not getting that money. I know who did accept that money. And he started to say the name, but then he said, well, I better not say anymore. I'll let the FBI catch him. And then he dies several days after that interview on film for Nick Broomfield's Kurt and Courtney. So that's some of the evidence that Courtney Love aided in powerful forces that killed Kurt Cobain. Now, then we have Hank Harrison's interview. And so you did a great job, Ed, when you were interviewing Hank Harrison, to take my evidence and my interview with Hank Harrison. I interviewed him for about 2 hours, and I just asked him about every little piece in his book that, including about Courtney Love, and the parts of Courtney Love that were most important to me were, okay, he incidentally, befriended a CIA agent, a guy named Stephen O'Leary, who was traveling with his, he was living in Ireland when he was there doing research. And then Stephen O'Leary immediately clings to his daughter, Courtney Love, who was 16 and just turned 17 when she arrived in Dublin, Ireland. And so I show a quote of his that she was actually hooking on the street at the time, prostituting herself on the streets of Dublin at that time, because she was already a heroin addict and had prostituted for the Taiwanese mafia and the Japanese mafia from the ages of 14 to about 16 or 17, around that time, or 18 or so. But here she was, just turned 17. She's got 1,000 hits of acid on her. And here's this guy, Stephen O'Leary, who's didn't admit it at the time, but he admitted it on his deathbed. He sent Hank Harrison a letter, Hank says, and he's got a copy of the letter. And he says this in print, too, in his book about the situation, that Stephen O'Leary was working as a CIA agent at the time and only admitted it on his deathbed in 2005. So I went and verified that. I found the obituary for Stephen O'Leary, and it's got his brother Kevin O'Leary, who Harrison also told me about, and where he died in Minnesota area, and I got that in there and all that. So I should show a copy of the obituary. And so with that verified, O'Leary's taking Courtney Love over to London and traveling with her for 6 weeks, and she proceeds to hand acid and other drugs out like candy. And she does the same thing in Portland, she does the same thing in Los Angeles, and she does the same thing in Seattle. And that was her MO. So she was an asset. I showed this is just some of the evidence that she was an asset of the U.S. intelligence. And this is the same pattern that happens with a number of musicians, that they get undercover agents involved or people that they just manipulated, like Courtney Love, who has it's hard to explain the manipulation and the dissociative identity disorder I believe she had, but she was, just inserted into Cobain's life, got him, inadvertently promoting heroin. And then when he sobered up and threatened to promote more leftist activism, anti-war activism, anti-racist activism, he was done away with. And so that's the pattern that's happened with Tupac and Cobain and Lennon and Jimi Hendrix. People were inserted in their lives and manipulate them. And when they started to break free of that manipulation and sobered up and started to promote anti-war and anti-racist activism, they were done away with.
Yeah, in another interview, Hank told me once that Courtney was living with a dominatrix madam. I think it was in San Francisco. Again, as a teenager, in her teenage years, she was living with a madam. And others, and she was also found on Jeffrey Epstein's plane.
Yeah.
And the idea, we're not.
And I have pictures of her with Kevin O'Leary as a rock star. She's hanging out with Kevin O'Leary, this old businessman. And there's several pictures, and they're like, "What's Courtney Love doing with Kevin O'Leary?" All these pictures say, these tabloids say, "Why are they hanging out together?" And it's because he knew her all, since about 16 or 17 years old. That's why, at least that long. Yeah, and he was the brother of CIA agent Stephen O'Leary. I don't know for sure, but the evidence seems to point to that. And Stephen O'Leary admitted he was a CIA agent to Hank Harrison in a letter, and he was traveling with Kevin O'Leary. Once he got to London, Kevin O'Leary was hanging out with him and Courtney when she was 17 years old, and they were hanging out for weeks together. And Hank said that Kevin was a senior to Steve because he was ordering him around.
Really? Yeah, I just specifically asked Hank if that Kevin Leary was the same Kevin Leary. He said he didn't know.
Yeah, it's hard to know. Yeah, I don't know either, but it's awfully coincidental that there's all these pictures of Courtney Love hanging out with Kevin O'Leary.
Yeah, he even says, Ed, he says, Leary is such a common name. Some people are named Leary. Out in Ireland. Because it's like Smith in Ireland. Everybody's named.
Yeah, so it might not be the same Kevin O'Leary, but it's awfully coincidental, I'll say.
I'd say so, too. Also, too, it's interesting now that in the news, Courtney Love is involved in this big lawsuit where she sent thugs, Sam Lufty and another couple of thugs, over to her son-in-law's house to kidnap him and force him at gunpoint to sign papers and return a guitar. So it's not like she's she's being accused of pretty much the same thing years later.
She acts like mafia. I mean, she's unbelievable. She punched, Kathleen Hanna, the lead singer of Bikini Kill, in the face, knocking her out at the Lollapalooza when Bikini Kill was playing Lollapalooza with Ho and with Sonic Youth. And just so Thurston Moore and I just forgot his wife's name in Sonic Youth, but they were good friends with Kurt. They were good friends with Kathleen Hanna. They were talking to Kathleen Hanna at Lollapalooza. And here comes Courtney Love, walks up and punches her in the face, knocks her out. And they were horrified. And they said, Sonic Youth, said they're not going to continue playing Lollapalooza until Ho was kicked off because of what Courtney Love did. And it went for a while. And then they finally were forced to say they had to keep playing. But it was under protest. It was just, she's unbelievable. She's unbelievably brutal. She's done this to a number of different women, just like beat them up for no reason. She's really incredibly brutal. And her first husband said he was so scared of her because whenever he said he wouldn't do something she was saying he had to do, she actually got goons to come beat him up for not doing what she said. So he finally ended up divorcing her.
Well, also, too, don't forget she was down there at Versace's house a couple of days before he got off. Wow. What are the odds of all this,
Yeah, I don't know that story, but I do know this. I mean, I know about Versace getting off. And it's interesting because Tupac Shakur was friends with Versace.
Oh, really?
He did a lot of modeling for Gianni Versace. And Faye Shakur defended Tupac when people said he's homophobic, saying he was good friends with, Gianni Versace, a very openly gay man, and they were close. Him and Kadada Jones, his fiance, were doing a lot of modeling for Versace. And so, I think with Courtney, though, one of the biggest cases is Kristen Pfaff. Kristen Pfaff was the best musician in Hole by far. I mean, there's lots of quotes of all kinds of magazines saying she made the band. And she was the bass player for Hole, and Kurt basically kind of fell in love with Kristen Pfaff. He said she's just a beautiful person in every way, and I'm just if Courtney heard that she'd hit the roof. But so when they were getting divorced, they had already planned to play music together, Kristen Pfaff and Kurt Cobain, because Pfaff had already left the band. So Pfaff ended up dying mysteriously once again. And the last person seen with her was, the guy from Hole, the guy from Hole that was in cohorts with Courtney Love. I forget his name, I think it was Eric Erlandson. But either way, but Courtney's fingerprints were all over that. And her cohort, Eric Erlandson in Hole, was very worrisome because he's the guy that first got Kristen Pfaff to try heroin and got her addicted before she sobered up and left the band.
It's also interesting too. Are you familiar with the incident where the cop who was murdered, like in the woods or something? One of the cops who investigated the Cobain case.
Yes.
What is that story? Go ahead.
Yeah, he wasn't killed in the woods. He was hit. He was knocked off. I mean, the people that he was shot and nearly killed, and he was just able to get back to the station and say, these guys were waving me down from the side of the road, and I pulled over, and one of them knew me. He said, "It's a cop" or something, and they shot him. And so, they knew his route home to be able to do that. What they did and it was covered up. But it was the first police officer murdered, in about 9 years. It showed how that was the case in Seattle, and it happens to be the guy that defied his boss's orders and put many, many hours into investigating the source of the heroin in Kurt Cobain's body and investigating the case when it was only, when his boss told him he's only supposed to investigate it as a suicide, not a homicide.
Okay, that's interesting. And are you the one too who told me that that Courtney could have been an informant with him?
No, I didn't say that.
No, okay. It's another little interesting tidbit here. I'm trying to look up right now as we talk. Is that what's that guy's? Who's the PI name? And all that.
Oh yeah. I just lost his name too. All of a sudden.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, Grant.
Tom Grant. Yeah. Now he did security for Paula Jones. Did the Paula Jones case happen before or after the death of Kurt Cobain? Do we know?
Well, I mean, obviously the Paula Jones case happened when Bill Clinton was first running for president. So, the instance that happened in her accusing President Bill Clinton. But I don't know about the case that much. I think the case continued till after Kurt Cobain was murdered. But I don't know that much about Grant except the fact that I think he did great work in exposing Courtney Love when Courtney Love hired him just to look for Kurt Cobain. He's started looking for Cobain and then realized that Love knew where Cobain was. It was just several days before Cobain died. And Cobain left a bunch of messages for Love saying, I'm here and I'm here and I'm here, because they still shared Frances Bean as a daughter, even though he was leaving her, and was talking to Rosemary Carroll, their lawyer, about saying he wanted her out of his will. They still shared a daughter. So he wanted, her to know where he was so that they can, he could see his daughter and all that. But so, I got Rosemary Carroll in the film saying that, his suicide note was a joke. It was just his handwriting copied, she thought, to make it look like a suicide note. It's I think Tom Grant did some great work in finding out that his credit card that was on him when he died was used after he died, and showed the evidence of that, and showed evidence around, like they said, the police. He pressed the police to say, "What about the fingerprints on the shotgun?" They waited a long time to process any fingerprints, and they said, "Oh, well, there was no fingerprints on a shotgun." And how does that happen? How do you put your hands all over a shotgun and say all of a sudden that, well, we couldn't find any fingerprints? But the importance of that is, of course, did someone else hold that shotgun to Kurt Cobain's mouth? And, other important stuff is, of course, the fact that they didn't develop the photographs at the crime scene for about a decade or more. I think it was about 15, 20 years, actually, for many years. So I think they developed them finally in 2014 when Cobain died in 94. So I have in the film a New York investigator saying, he's never seen them not develop the photographs of a crime scene. He said it's unbelievable that he's never heard that before. So that's just some of the evidence around the fact that Cobain was murdered, of course.
What do you make of the incident where Grant couldn't find the shotgun when he searched the room?
I don't know. I don't remember that too well.
Yeah.
I think Grant exposed a lot of good stuff. I don't know about that not finding the shotgun aspect of things, but I do think that Grant happens to be a super straight and narrow law and order kind of guy. I mean, that's my impression. And that's actually what Hank had originally said, but Hank says he's very right wing politically. Yeah. And that certainly could be true, because I don't think Tom Grant wants to consider the fact that U.S. intelligence could have been involved in Kurt Cobain's death. But maybe I'm wrong. I'd like to be wrong about that, but I don't know. Okay.
Hey, now what about LSD? I can understand, because the theory of the movie is that the government and these intelligence agencies, they get activists addicted to heroin and on drugs to kind of destroy us. But what's the motive with LSD? Like, what's going on with that?
Yeah, so, well, look, Ramsey Clark had told me in 1991 at a conference that I asked him, what do you think the government uses drugs for? And he says, if they're trafficking drugs, he says, well, he thinks they use it to sedate and divide the masses.
Right.
Now, the former head of the Students for Democratic Society, I forget the name of the top man now because they switched every year. But I quote him as saying that, he read Acid Dreams, which is the founder of Fairness and Accuracy and Reporting's book, Martin Lee and Bruce Lane's book on the way the CIA was trafficking acid. And he says if drugs were used to sedate his whole generation, then the reason they were doing it was to disorient it, disrupt it, and divert it. And so I show that was what happened. Okay, you got what you get Ronald Stark, who was found to be basically distributing and selling at least 100 million hits of acid in England alone over a 3-year period, according to Dick Lee, who was the top British investigator who found all this and found the drug trafficking ring under Ronald Stark. And Ronald Stark was the leader of the ring, but he was working with the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. And in an Italian court in Italy, Stark was arrested. And the first judge in his case was murdered. The second judge had said he was releasing Stark because of numerous proofs that Stark had been working with the Secret Services since 1960. Meaning, this is now, and the case was 1975 in Italy. And so for at least 15 years, he was working with the U.S. intelligence, Ronald Stark. And he had acid laboratories on at least 3 different continents. And the Brotherhood of Eternal Love has been the top supplier of LSD. And so this is just some of the mass of evidence that, MK Ultra, the CIA's MK Ultra, it was called Project MK Ultra, started in 1953. I show that, Ernest Hemingway's editor, A.E. Hotchner, in his book, Blown Away, that Robert Lashbrook, the assistant director of MK Ultra, had brought over tons of agents and acid and money to London in 1965 and told his agents, and I quote, he quotes the agents in there saying, put LSD in as many musicians' hands as possible. And the reason is they've been testing that LSD all throughout the 50s on thousands of soldiers, particularly Edgewood Arsenal soldiers, but thousands of different soldiers. And they tested about 36 different drugs on all these soldiers and found the long-term effects, the short-term effects, the long-term effects. And they, in the long-term effects, 19 years later, at least 25% of those soldiers said that they still felt like their minds were hurt by using LSD. Even 19 years later, they felt their minds were still hurting from their LSD use. So it causes some problems in people. I show at least 4 studies that say that there's some kind of cerebral damage going on there, and they're just not sure how and why it's happening, but their tests are showing cerebral damage appears to be happening in people using LSD. Now, is it pure LSD or is it street LSD? That we're not, sure of, because strychnine was LSD was being cut with strychnine, a rat poison, for many years, and still is with much street acid. And so obviously rat poison is not good for your brain, but it's causing, a lot of psychological problems and all that. I'm sorry about that. The phone, I'll turn that off.
That's okay.
But so they, it just shows that they were using the LSD to hurt the minds of activists because they were dosing the head of Students for Democratic Society in Columbia, around Columbia University in New York City. They dosed, loads of people, loads of activists. Timothy Leary admitted working for the CIA knowingly since 1963, and he brought 20,000 hits of LSD to the Black Panther encampment in Algeria, where Eldridge Cleaver and his wife Kathleen Cleaver, were hosting, a Black Panther party in exile. Okay, so I'm just full of phones. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
So that's some of the evidence that is out there, of what they were doing. And so the undercover agents had also infiltrated Abby Hoffman's group, Yippies. And Abbie Hoffman got his first hit of acid from a MK Ultra scientist. And at that time, all the evidence shows that he wasn't using any drugs at all. He wasn't smoking weed. He was married. He had 2 kids, and he was an excellent activist up in the Boston area in Massachusetts. And after someone convinced him to try LSD, a few people convinced him to try LSD. He ended up leaving his wife and kids and moves down to New York and starts the Yippies. And the Yippies were heavily infiltrated, and then they, in turn, dosed other people and other activists.
Well, what do you describe to me? So, because I was with the Yippies down there in New York, on Bleecker Street. Describe some of the infiltration that you're talking about.
Well, George Demerly is one of the infiltrators. I name a few of the infiltrators in my book, and we're not going to be able to ever find out who all the infiltrators were. But George Demerly was one of them, and Demerly started an offshoot group of the Yippies called the Crazies.
Sure.
And so they ended up entrapping three top bombers of military-related buildings. That was Gene Alpert, who wrote a memoir about it. Sam Melville, who they called the Mad Bomber when he was in jail, who also led the Attica uprisings and was killed in the Attica uprisings. That was Gene Alpert's boyfriend. And another good activist woman and her boyfriend, they actually are the ones that started bombing buildings connected to the war, and then would call in advance. It was time bombs. They would call the building in advance, try to evacuate everyone, saying there's a bomb's going to go off, and at this time get everyone out of there. And a bomb would go off in protest of the war. They only did this after they tried every other means to protest the war. But it caught on, and activists were doing this all over the country, and the weathermen started doing it too. But Demerly was, he got involved with them, and then he got them put in jail. But he also got involved with the much more peaceful activists and tried to mess their minds up with acid. And so it's just that's some of what was going on with Demerly. There was another biker who was an undercover FBI agent. I forget his name. I got him listed in my book. Who was one of either Abbie Hoffman or Jerry Rubin's bodyguards. So that's some of it.
Yeah, there's by coincidence, I just happened to be reading Abbie Hoffman steal this book last night. I have an autographed copy I got from him, but I was reading the version online. And have you read it?
I think I read parts of it. I didn't read the whole thing. He was tripping so much at different points that I can't say I loved all his work by any means. I think I was glad he tried to do the activism he did, but promoting acid wasn't a good part of his activism.
Yeah, a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah,
connections to the Jewish Defense Organization.
That's too bad.
Yeah, and even down there at 9 Bleecker Street, there was tons of marijuana in that building. How is everybody getting away with this? It's just
right.
The whole Richard Stratton hippie mafia stuff going on. Tons of hash he's bringing in.
Right.
It's how are they getting away with this? But then again, some of them did do time.
Yeah. And I understand that Jewish defense idea. It's just that I heard the Jewish defense group was working with U.S. intelligence, but I'm not sure of that. I just, the idea of fighting anti-Semitism is a great idea. Yeah. But the Jewish Defense League or whatever their exact group was, I just heard that they were doing ugly things. So, yeah.
But it was JDO. There was 2, the JDO and the JDL, and the AJ was with the JDO. And the thing is, though, is that they had
was bad news, and the other one was a little more well-meaning. I'm not sure which one.
But the thing is that there has to be a Mossad connection there. There just has to be. How could there not be?
Yeah, I don't know that, but there could be. I just don't know much about it. I really don't know much about it except for a little bit I read.
It's just all such a cesspool, everything's just so infiltrated. And the older you get, the more you look back and see different things. Just so much makes no sense, you don't know which way to look, which way to turn.
Yeah.
All right. I forgot what I was going to ask you.
Was SDS or Abbie Hoffman or the infiltrators and the Yippies
I don't know. I'm all depressed now. Oh no, I was going to mention the thing about the connection between High Times magazine and Larry Flynt, because Larry Flynt would purchase all the High Times magazines with Tom Prasad, the original copies, and then resell them. So basically, High Times was funded by Larry Flynt.
That's funny. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's just one thing after another. So, and also too in the movie too, you get into the whole thing about the original opium trade and the bankers, how the bankers funded all this, and the same banking institutions that we have today. Can you cover that real quick?
Yeah, well, basically, the America was found by, well, I shouldn't say America, but the Ivy League colleges were founded with tons of money from the wealthiest families who happened to make a lot of their money off of opium dealing, opium shipping. And they did that with the British East India Company. And so I have James Bradley, who was the New York Times bestselling author of what's it called? That Clint Eastwood movie. Clint Eastwood made a movie based on it. Flags of Our Fathers, it was called.
Okay.
And so I had Bradley in the movie explaining that the Lowe family, made their money off of opium shipping before creating Lowe Library at Columbia University and creating, putting the money into a lot of the major buildings of Columbia University. The Russell family put huge amounts of money to start Yale University, and the Russells were the biggest opium shippers in America. And same thing with Green at Princeton and the Cabots at Harvard. And you can just go through not all of them, but most of those Ivy League schools were founded by families that made huge amounts of wealth off of opium money. And so I show how this continued, and to the point where the Russells founded the Skull and Bones Society, the secret society at Yale. And each of the people that graduated from Skull and Bones got the equivalent of about $220,000, upon graduation. And so they started off hugely ahead of everyone else with all that kind of money upon graduation. And that money was the Russell Trust, which funded those endowments of each of those Skull and Bones members, was opium money. And so that's some of the way it worked. And so the JP Morgan family, P stands for Pierpont. They were intermarried with the Russells. Rockefellers a lot of them graduated from Yale from Skull and Bones. And, the Carnegies and Vanderbilts were all very close with these other opium shipping families. And that's the way it all worked. They basically founded the eugenics movement. And so you come up to today and you see that JP Morgan Chase was founded by the Rockefeller family. JP Morgan I just described, and that's the largest bank in the world. And then you got HSBC, which stands for Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. That's the third largest bank in the world. It's Europe's largest bank. And that was founded just a few years after the Second Opium War. And the Opium Wars were a war in China to force the Chinese to stop banning opium. The Chinese leaders banned opium because they found so much of their population getting addicted. And so England fought 2 wars on behalf of opium shippers. And they won those wars against China and forced China to give up Taiwan and give up Hong Kong. And so that's where that new bank was formed based on that opium shipping, and then became the third largest bank in the world. And now those same banks, though, now are caught laundering between 500 and $1 billion and $1 trillion of drug money. Well, money, we'll say in general, but a majority of it's drug money. And those figures come from the United Nations inspectors. Those are commonly known figures. $500 billion to $1 trillion a year is laundered in U.S. banks. And so it's just, HSBC was caught with a ton of money laundering in Europe, but by the Obama administration actually caught them and fined them. But JP Morgan Chase was fined by the Obama administration for massive money laundering, and of course, again, the majority of it drugs money, but a number of the banks were caught laundering loads of money that way, to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. I said.
So here we have these major institutions, some of the greatest founding institutions of the whole of our country, but really the whole world. And they got their fortunes opium.
Started by opium.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, was there ever a day or an incident that we can look to that they point to that say, hey, this is the day we stopped doing all that?
Well, that's the big question.
Yeah.
And just the best evidence, as I said earlier in our interview, Judy Woodruff of Frontline says, here's the CIA document saying that they admitted that they were flying out from Vietnam with the heroin and into the United States with the heroin. So, and then they got CIA whistleblower, Stockwell talking about it and all. So, so why was the CIA doing that? Well, the CIA was started by a lot of these top families I talked about, the Rockefellers, Bushes, the Harrimans, the Vanderbilts, the JP Morgans, the Carnegies. They were all key to starting the CIA because the CIA was made by the National Security Council Act of 1947. It was made above the law, CIA. Like they were, by, its founding, it could do things outside the law, just on, base it on the interest of national security. It wasn't national security, right? It was just their own security to keep doing illegal things. The families, the oligarchs that run this country.
Yeah, and you hear these stories. I had Frank Sturgis's nephew on my show. He talks about how Frank had his own B-25 bomber. had his own bombing jet, and he was dropping bombs at the palace. I think it was in Haiti because of a gambling debt that the guy, the president of Haiti, owed a gambling debt to the mafia. And Frank Sturgis is dropping a bomb on his house.
Yeah, for people that don't know, Sturgis was a Watergate plumber. He was caught with by the Nixon administration involved in the Watergate break-in, right?
Oh yeah.
And Sturgis ran with Jose Perdomo, Jose San Janis Perdomo, who was the doorman at the Dakota the night John Lennon was killed. And it's believed that while Mark Chapman was one of the shooters of John Lennon, the other shooter to make sure it was effective was Jose Perdomo. He was actually the first person suspected of doing the shooting. And so here is a guy, a CIA hitman, who gets a job working as John Lennon's doorman that night at the apartment building, right there when he's killed. And so it's just one of many pieces of evidence that the CIA murdered John Lennon, sadly enough.
Yeah, just one thing after another, and the film covers so many different topics from so many different angles, and it ends pretty much with and here we are now in Afghanistan, pretty much doing the same thing. Because the beginning is the whole history of the opium trade, and then toward the end, it's back
to opium trade in Afghanistan, right? Thanks. Yeah, I mean, here we are, the longest war in U.S. history in Afghanistan, the second longest war in history in Vietnam, the two areas of the top poppy to grow poppies to produce opium and heroin in the world. And
it's fascinating too, because I remember they released a video from a bomber jet. That Trump had one of the opium, the heroin manufacturing plants in Afghanistan. They bombed it. And this was no little shack. This was like a big, giant factory. This is a big operation. What do you think the motivations, or maybe like an act, or you think he really did it? What do you think went on there?
I don't know. Yeah, because usually they're protecting the poppy fields. And, there's loads of pictures of soldiers protecting the poppy fields. And they were really upset, when the Taliban actually eradicated the heroin, the poppy fields. They said no more heroin dealing. In 2000, the Taliban, New York Times and Washington Post even admitted that the Taliban had said no more heroin trafficking out of Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And all the U.S. had left in 2000 was the Northern Alliance with a tiny percentage of heroin trafficking because all the rest was outlawed and stopped. And that was a huge hit on the stock market because of all the money laundering that boosts the stock market. So that was one of the biggest reasons it appears for the invasion of Afghanistan. But of course, as soon as we controlled Afghanistan more, with all of our occupying forces, all of a sudden the heroin went back into production, and it went to record-breaking levels in Afghanistan, and still is there today, supplying 70 to 90% of the world with its opium and heroin. But so I don't know. I didn't hear about what you just said about Trump bombing a heroin producing factory. If it's true, good that he did. If it's not, I just don't know if it is true. But I was very happy to hear that Trump was pulling soldiers out of Afghanistan and Syria, and that was great news. And God knows how the press attacked him for that. Ridiculous. But the press has just routinely supported perpetual war, sadly enough, because they're in bed. They share boards of directors with the arms manufacturers and the oil companies and the pharmaceutical companies that get cheaper opium from those places too.
Yeah, I wish we had more time to get into the whole business about how the press is supporting this invasion into Venezuela right now. But unfortunately, we don't. Well, maybe we'll have to come back. So, John, we're out of time. What do you want to leave us with before you go?
Well, thanks so much, Ed, for media like yours that push the new information like this. But I just hope people can look at this information at drugsasweaponsmovie.com and find the places to rent the film or buy the film. And if you like what you hear, remember there's a whole lot more of that information on each subject in the book, and you can buy it there, or you can buy it at drugsasweapons.com.
Yeah, the book is very. The movie is very thoroughly covers a lot of topics. Very well researched. A great documentary. John Potash, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Ed.
Good night. Okay, so we had John Potash from johnpotash.com and Drugs as Weapons Against Us movie. Excellent film. I really enjoyed it. And winning awards all over the place. I'm not the only one that enjoys it just because I'm in it. Thank you so much, John Potash, johnpotash.com.